Okay, so I have a small problem with recording this video now, and that is that I don't know which order I'm going to be putting these videos out. See, when I'm recording this, it's before a Saturday where I'm supposed to be uploading a Plural 101 episode, but I really don't want to upload that episode without having an OSDD episode out, just an OSDD video in general out. So this probably will not be going on the Plural 101 playlist, and this is probably going to come out before, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So first, we need to know what is OSDD. OSDD is short for Other Specified Dissociative Disorder. It is the diagnosis given to someone who experiencing clinical distress and impairment due to dissociative symptoms that don't qualify for a diagnosis of another disorder, but when the presentation is known. This is different from unspecified dissociative disorder, or UDD, because UDD is diagnosed when the presentation isn't certain. So, someone who's diagnosed only with OSDD will not have DID, but someone who is diagnosed with only UDD could have any other dissociative disorder, and usually that diagnosis will be transformed into another dissociative disorder, like OSDD, once it's known what the symptoms are. UDD as a diagnosis is usually given in emergency rooms or very early in treatment because it's what's given when a clinician doesn't have the information they need to diagnose with something specific. OSDD is not that. When you're diagnosed with OSDD, you know what your presentation is. And OSDD actually has 4 subtypes listed in the DSM-5, which is what I'm most familiar with because I don't know if you can tell from my everything, but I live in the United States. So one thing you might not know about OSDD is that it has 4 subtypes. And the reason you don't know that is because it's very common for people to treat OSDD-1 as synonymous with all OSDDs. There's a massive amount of OSDD-1 centrism that is really harmful for other people with OSDD. One other thing about OSDD is that OSDD-1, what is called OSDD-1 in the United States, is not considered an OSDD in the rest of the world. In the ICD, which the rest of the world uses, it's partial DID. The use of OSDD to just mean people with OSDD-1 is an aspect of DID centrism, which I'll unpack at a different time, but DID centrism is a massive issue in the plural and dissociative communities alike, and it's awful. So OSDD-1 is generally best defined as being like DID, dissociative identity disorder, but with a criterion missing. Generally, someone with OSDD-1 will either experience distinct alters without amnesia between them, without clinically significant amnesia, and the other presentation would be experiencing amnesia, but not experiencing a lot of separation between alters as defined in the DSM, so they may not have a full separate identity of their own. These are sometimes referred to as OSDD-1A and OSDD-1B. OSDD-1A would be with less separation between alters, and OSDD-1B would be with less amnesia. These are not actual diagnoses. These don't exist. They're terms used in the community, so no doctor will diagnose you with 1A. The terms are instead taken from DD-NOS, which was what OSDD used to be called, which did have subtypes 1A and 1B that turned into OSDD-1. OSDD-2 is identity disturbance that is caused by intense long-term coercion and persuasion. OSDD-2 will generally form from some very triggering things, so skip ahead about 10 seconds if you don't want to hear that. It's usually formed by things like being recruited into or raised in a cult, brainwashing, torture, thought reform, basically any attempt to brainwash or control someone's thoughts that happens in a sort of ritualized or like consistent long-term manner. It's usually observed in people with RAMCOA backgrounds, which would be ritual abuse, mind control, and organized abuse, and in former prisoners of war, as well as anyone who has been in a cult. The existence of OSDD-2 is part of why I'm very angry about DID/PDID centrism in the community, and especially the idea that is promoted by a lot of people who claim that they're fighting for people with dissociative disorders, that those two disorders are the only ones that can cause an experience like having alters, or just being plural in general outside of a medical context. It's also often argued that those two disorders are trauma disorders or are only caused by trauma, and that they are the worst ones or the worst form of PTSD. That is entirely untrue. I guess I'll put a screen cap of the DSM up here for you to check it out, but they are not trauma disorders. They are related to trauma disorders, but the only two types of dissociative disorder that explicitly have a trigger in their criteria are OSDD-2 and OSDD-3. OSDD-2 is the only dissociative disorder that requires a very specific kind of trauma to form, and the existence of it disproves the concept that DID and OSDD-1 must be caused by trauma, but it's just not in the criteria because you'd forget it. Because people with OSDD-2 can also have amnesia. Amnesia is a very common symptom or consequence of brainwashing and the like. So, yeah, that's just gross, I think. And it makes me very angry. I'm very upset that other kinds of OSDD are not talked about by the community. And it's part of why I've stopped referring to OSDD-1 as OSDD-1 in a lot of conversation and have started calling it PDID. But anyway, that rant's over. Let's talk about OSDD-3. OSDD-3 is the dissociative disorder that I have. It manifests as acute dissociative episodes and sort of responses to stress and trauma. So for me, that means a lot of time, if I'm in school, which I'm not right now, but when I'm in school, the stress of school will trigger extremely severe dissociative episodes for me, to the point that I appeared to have DID for a very long time. We're still plural, we're still multiple people in one body, but we are not actually that way because of dissociation, which is what we thought until I was removed from a stressful situation and stopped having dissociative episodes. And now, periodically, like every month or so, I'll have a dissociative episode between like an hour and a month. Also using I loosely, it's we, but I spent a lot of time around singlets today, so I'm forgetting. The main thing that separates this from stuff like DID and OSDD-1 and OSDD-2 is the dissociation associated with OSDD-3 is not constant. I am not dissociating outside of what's normal for someone with my other mental health conditions most of the time. It's just like if I experience a traumatic event or if I get too stressed out, I'll have a very bad dissociative episode. For me, sometimes that will manifest as dissociative catatonia, which is a thing that is relatively common in OSDD-3. And this is separate from a dissociative trance. I'm generally aware when I'm just having some dissociative catatonia, and I can be snapped out of it without too much effort, but I can't snap myself out of it, and I'll usually just sort of be sitting like this and just listening to what's happening around me, which is very fun. And then OSDD-4 is also not always considered an OSDD. Outside of the United States, it is trance disorder, and as the name trance disorder implies, it's characterized by dissociative trances, where someone will suddenly be very unaware of their environment and often become somewhat catatonic and not really move. This doesn't necessarily need to have an obvious trigger, and sort of the sticking point with this one is it can't be a trance related to like religious practices. It needs to be outside of the scope of what's normal for like a religion or cultural practice. So those are the OSDDs, and my sort of strong feelings on how we talk about them in general. Frankly, I'm just like really tired of DIT centrism in general, and I do think it might be more productive. This is all my opinion, to be clear, but I think it might be more productive to refer to OSDD-1 as PDID, or something similar that conveys that it is basically dissociative identity disorder, because it is. The defining criteria of it is the fact that it's almost qualified for DID, and I think that just like allowing those two to be similar, allowing them to be the same sort of diagnosis on some level would be more helpful, because the divide between the OSDD-1 and DID communities is extremely artificial and not productive in my opinion. I just realized my lipstick is bleeding because I put on too much lip gloss. Awesome. And also, because of how DID centrism works, the inclusion of OSDD-1 when we're talking about OSDD means that if I bring up OSDD, people will assume I'm talking about OSDD-1, because it's just the only OSDD they know. So I would enjoy saying OSDD to explicitly mean I'm not talking about OSDD-1, actually, because OSDD erasure is a massive issue. And again, outside of the United States, OSDD-1 isn't an OSDD. It's really kind of just a United States and I guess Canada thing, to call it OSDD-1. And, you know, DSM centrism in the plural community is nothing new. Frankly, I don't like the DSM at all, and if I could just burn it, I would. But until I can just burn it, these are the terms that we have, and I would like for people to be able to find communities of other people with their issues, which will not happen until people will recognize that there are other OSDDs. There's 3 of them. The only reasons why I can think that, like, the other 3 are ignored a lot is kind of just they don't really fit a good narrative if you are going to be DID-centric, and if you're trying to argue a medicalist, it's not medical, position on dissociative disorders and plurality in general. Because if you acknowledge OSDDs 2 and 3, you also have to acknowledge that DID and OSDD-1 have no requirement for stress or trauma to cause them on any level. And also, that's assuming we're treating the DSM like it should determine whether people can self-identify their experiences. I'm very strongly of the opinion that if you're being more exclusive than the DSM-5, you have some stuff you need to reconsider. Also, a lot of people who experience OSDD-2 specifically are not comfortable or able to be very public about it, because it is a disorder that is kind of only formed by a very specific kind of trauma that often inhibits your ability to speak open about it, because that's, you know, how it works. OSDD-3 is kind of easy to not realize you have, and I don't doubt that a lot of people who identify as having DID or OSDD-1 actually have OSDD-3, but don't realize it because they don't know OSDD-3 exists. I mean, we didn't. We thought we had DID, and it turns out our system isn't disordered, we just have a dissociative disorder, and when the dissociative disorder is flaring, our system will act like it's caused by dissociation. But I have heard a lot of people who identify as OSDD-1 and DID systems who do not experience dissociation most of the time, but will experience extreme episodes, over stress. So I don't know, if that's you, I would consider OSDD-3, especially if your dissociation manifests as trances in any way, or like sort of being stuck in place, or losing awareness of your surroundings a lot, because that happened for us, and we just didn't know what it was. And then OSDD-4, I'm not sure what's up with it other than, like, you know, general DID centrism. DID centrism affects how we talk about all plurality and all dissociative disorders. I mean, it's very common for people to just entirely ignore dissociative amnesia as its own condition, DPDR. I'm definitely forgetting something right now. But those dissociative disorders are just as important to recognize and talk about. And plural people can experience all of them. There's also the common misconception that you can't have 2 of them at once. This is wrong. You can have DID and DPDR, and actually they're very commonly comorbid. You can have OSDD-3 and dissociative amnesia. That is possibly what we have. And we'll be talking about amnesia in general in a later video. Finally, before I close this out, because I've been rambling for like 20 minutes now, I made an OSDD flag. It should be right here, right now, somewhere there. There are OSDD flags out there, but they have the small problem of all being for OSDD-1. Literally all of them. Actually, there's a couple OSDD flags that aren't technically exclusive to OSDD-1, but they're all directly derived from OSDD-1 flags and do not talk about any of the other OSDDs in general. And I think that sucks. I think that blows. Especially when, again, OSDD-1 isn't even an OSDD in most of the world. Anyway, we have no lack of OSDD-1 flags, but we don't have any OSDD flags that are not specifically for OSDD-1. Actually, hi, future editing crow here. While doing research to grab some flags for this video, I found this flag made by an OSDD-2 system to represent OSDD-2, but it's not a general OSDD flag, but it's pretty cool. That's a problem, and I don't like it. So, behold. As you can see, it has got 4 stripes. We've got black or very dark navy blue for hardship and representing prisoners of war and people who are missing in action, abuse prevention, and stress and trauma. Yellow for recovery, survival, and hope. Teal for community solidarity and dissociation and mental health awareness. A teal ribbon is both the dissociative and mental health awareness symbol. And purple for the variety of and fluctuating experiences, and just generally the entire OSDD spectrum. And you're free to use it or not. This flag does include people with OSDD-1. The goal is really just to, for once, have OSDD-1 not be the entire center of the OSDD conversation. So many times I've been talking to people about OSDD, and they realize during the conversation that they had one of the other subtypes because the OSDD community is so bad at discussing it, and most of these people who I talked to had a lot of history in medicalist spaces that claim to be the most focused on people with OSDD. And it's fighting for a very specific set of people with DID and PDID. And I don't know, the sooner we acknowledge that, the sooner we can fix how we approach people with OSDD. Because OSDD awareness and liberation can't happen if 3/4 of all OSDDs are completely left in the shadows, you know? So I've been Crow. Thanks for listening to my very long rant. I hope you enjoyed it. I know there's a bug flying around me. If you can see it, I'm sorry. Thanks for joining me. We have a Discord server down below that you can join if you're interested in just kind of chilling. It's open to anyone, but it does sort of focus on plural people a bit. We have a Ko-Fi down below if you want to support us and support our ability to focus on making videos and all that. You can check that out. You can check out our zines. And of course, like, comment, subscribe if you want to. If you don't want to, then more power to you. Thanks for coming around. I've been Crow, and have a good day.